If you've ever played a board game before, you've probably used something like this. These, as you would likely say, are dice. However, to me and a couple of other people around the world, these are not dice. These are called D6s. Because when it comes to tabletop role-playing games, like Dungeons & Dragons and Call of Cthulhu and many others, this is only one type of die that is used in the game alongside many other types of various shapes and sizes. For example, like Dungeons & Dragons, your smallest type of die that you'll ever use is one of these. You might have seen one of these before, and yes, it's still called a die, but we call this a D4 because it's a 4-sided die. And the dice you saw earlier are D6s because they're 6-sided. Correct, you get yourself a cookie. And Dungeons & Dragons goes all the way up to using these big dice. This is the most prominent die, and you've probably seen this one, and it's called a D20. But what are all the different dice between D4s like this and D20s like this? How many are there, and what do they look like? So let's go through all the typical dice you'll find in your typical TTRPG and talk about which ones are the best, what circumstances they're called for, and which one is my personal favorite and which one is my least personal favorite. It's the D4. I don't like the D4. Nobody likes the D4. It's a necessary evil that we have to deal with, but nobody likes this piece of shit cattle trap. At first glance, the little pyramid of hell is a strange looking die because of the way it rolls and the way it looks. Most people struggle to realize what number they're rolling when they roll one of these pyramid hell holes, but it's actually the number that's at the very top when it's seated upright. Now, if you're an unfortunate soul, you'll come across D4s that look like this, where the number you roll is actually on the bottom instead of the top. Whoever decided to make D4s like this deserves a special place in an asylum. Now, this may be hard to convey through the camera. If you've never held one of these D4s before, you might not understand why I hate them so much. So let me break it down to you. If you ever get a chance to pick up a D4, put it on the table and then just try and pick it up. And then pick up literally anything else off that table. These are not intuitive pickup because you have to pick it up from its point like this, and they can just squeeze and slip out like so. They're just not fun. They also don't roll because they're not rounded in any regard. They just kind of that. Oh, and also when I called them cattle traps, yeah, drop one of these and then go walking around barefooted. It's not fun. But what are D4s good at? Well, average rolls. Considering there's only 4 points on this die, you will consistently roll the highest number for 25% of the time. And in games like Dungeons & Dragons, they typically represent the damage for small weapons like daggers. A dagger is not going to be able to do a whole lot of damage, so even when you max out the damage on that dagger, it's only going to be a 4 if you max roll it. Versus something like a longsword that if you swing that two-handed, you are now rolling that with a D10. Which can go up to 10. Versus a longsword where if you swing it one-handed, you're rolling a D8, and if you swing it two-handed, you're rolling a D10, but we'll get there. They have their place, they're necessary evils that I wouldn't ever get rid of, but I don't typically use them all that often outside of very rare circumstances. One of those rare circumstances I would say is if I'm going to give a player a cursed magic item that does damage, I will typically have that cursed magic item roll a ton of D4. Because on the plus side, it helps with the average. You will roll consistently more middle of the road with D4s than you would with D10s or D12s, but on the opposite side, you now can transfer that feeling of using a cursed weapon to the player when they're picking up 6d4 to roll for their damage instead of D10s or D8s. They get the bonus of better average on their damage, but they get the negative of you're using a cursed weapon, and every time you pick up these little bitches, you feel like you're using a cursed weapon. So hey, it's good for that too. And from that, we move on. That wasn't where that was supposed to go. To the D6. Like I mentioned in the beginning, you've likely seen these dice before, and most of us call them dice, because that's all they are. They're the dice you use for most board games you'll find. However, you'll notice another thing that you might have clued onto. These do not have numbers on them, they have pips. Looking at these here, this has 4 pips, this has 2 pips, and this has 5 pips. Whereas in most TTRPG dice, they'll look like this, where they don't have pips, they have the actual numbers themselves imprinted on the die. Why is that? Well, most games where you're using these, you're not using any other type of die, so you can be fine with just having things with pips on them. However, in TTRPG games, you're not gonna find pips on D12s or D8s or D20s. You wanna put 20 pips on one of those little sides? Good luck. So that's why for us, we do not call these dice. We call them the D6. Now, depending on what type of game you were using, D6s could still be the most prominent game in that TTRPG for you. For example, a D6 is simply one out of many dice in Dungeons & Dragons. However, if you're playing a game like Daggers in the Dark, the D6 is the primary dice used in that game. Same thing with games like Candela Obscura by Critical Role, which is heavily inspired by Blades in the Dark, but they also only use D6s. So what are the bonuses to having a D6? Well, they're still quite consistent with the average number, not as good as D4s, there is 2 more sides, and you'll find that as we go up in dice, the consistency, of course, diminishes, and that will stop being a positive. If you don't know what type of damage die you want a weapon to do or you want a spell to do, you usually start with a D6 and then decide if you need to go up from there or if you need to go down from there. Now after the D6, we have the D7, a staple when it comes to modern TTRPG. What's that? That's a weird looking dice that you've never seen before? Well, you're right, because that is not part of a TTRPG dice set. That is part of Curiosity Box's Denary dice set, now available. This Denary dice set is currently available for people who purchase the annual subscription for Curiosity Box's current box. Made by the legendary creator Michael from Vsauce, the Curiosity Box brings all kinds of unique goodies for people who like to think. This video is not sponsored by Curiosity Box. They did not pay me anything to say this. However, they did send me the Denary dice set for free, and I have a link where you can get a discount on your annual subscription. Scan the QR code on screen right now to head over to Curiosity Box to check out their current box, or use the link down in the description. Thank you, Curiosity Box, for the Denary dice set, and now let's talk about D8 diamonds. Now we're getting to dice that you've likely never seen before, like these D8s. These are quite unique as they're very diamond shaped and they have nice triangle shapes for each side of the die, with 4 numbers on top and 4 numbers on the bottom, making it the least average of all the dice we've looked at so far. Now for dice rolled, I would say the D8 is my second favorite overall. I like the feeling of them, I like the look of them, I think they look quite elegant, be it that they are diamond shaped, and you'll also find D8s as one of the more common items when it comes to damage types that are rolled, especially as you get higher in like the mid game for DD Revolution. Like example, the longsword, when you're wielding it one-handed, will throw out a D8 for damage. Now two-handed it'll go up to a D10, but most people are using longswords with a shield or one-handed, which means you're likely going to be rolling the D8s most of the time. But after D8s comes one of the stranger types of dice, which is technically 2 dice mixed into one, and they're one of my lesser favorites, and that's the D10. The D10 is one of the weirder types of dice you'll find in TTRPGs because you most commonly find them paired with something called the D100. You mean there's 100-sided dice? No. You can buy those, but that's not exactly what it is. Because what you'll typically get is one of these. This is your standard D10. It goes through 1 to 0. The 0 is meant to denote the 10 on the die, which is quite confusing to new people who think they roll the die and got a 0 from time to time when it's actually a 10. However, why they have it as a 0 is because you typically pair it with one of these, which looks exactly the same as a D10, but it has the numbers going from 10 to 90 rather than 1 to 0. And the reasoning for that is that if you take the regular one and roll it by itself, it counts as a D10, and you simply count the 0 as a 10 on the die when you roll it. But if you roll the 2 of them together, you then count the 10-sided dice as the first number rolled. So if I was to roll this one and I get a 40, that means I've rolled 40, and then I rolled this one, 9. So that roll would be a 49. Now D10s, just this one, are used a fair bit in D&D. But D100s are not used very often. Some spell effects, like teleport or the wild magic table for the wild mage sorcerer, will use a D100 chart where you will have to roll both of these together to see what your result is, but those come up very infrequently in most D&D campaigns. However, if you play Call of Cthulhu, D100 is your standard go-to dice. Like Daggers in the Dark before with D6s, the D100 is your standard and only type of dice that you use in Call of Cthulhu. There's probably other games that also use the D100, but I don't know them. But if you know them, share in the comment section down below, I'd love to learn. So while using the D10 by itself, I don't mind. I think it's a nice dice. It's not particularly great, it's not particularly bad. I just don't like that one of them is actually a 0 on there. I understand why, but even after all these years of playing with them, I still don't like it. It's one of those necessary evils, again, like the D4, but it's just something we have to just live with. Now after the D10s, however, we get to my favorite type of dice, The D12 gets my pick as my most favorite die when it comes to TTRPGs because of two main factors. One, its size and feel is just immaculate. It's the perfectly shaped die for most rolls. It's not cumbersome like D20s. It's not sharp and annoying like D4s or even D6s sometimes. It's just the perfect shaped dice. And secondly, it's the underdog. Out of all the dice rolled in TTRPGs, the D12 is used probably the most infrequent out of all of them. Now, if you play games like Daggerheart, the D12 is the most common dice rolled in that. Like Call of Cthulhu uses D100s, and like Blaze in the Dark uses D6s, the D12 is your go-to dice in Daggerheart. But in Dungeons & Dragons, it's rarely ever used outside of very high powerful spells, or barbarians for their hit dice, or some really strong melee weapons. Outside of those small niche things, you won't really be picking up D12s all that often, if ever sometimes. And that's what makes it the underdog for me, and that's why paired with how it feels to roll and its shape, makes it the pristine die out of all TTRPG dice. But we have one die left, and it's the biggest jump, because every die we've talked about so far has only been increments of 2, D4, D6, D8, D10, D12. But now, is there a D14? No. D16, D18? No. We skip right from the D12 and go to the granddaddy of them all, the D20. The most prominent die in most TTRPGs, and especially Dungeons & Dragons. It's the dice you hear about when people roll natural 20s, it's the dice you hear about when people roll natural 1s, it's on merchandise, it's on t-shirts, it's on box art, it's everywhere. Because if you don't know, the vast majority of the rolls you will do in Dungeons & Dragons are made using the D20. All the other dice I've shown you throughout this video are typically only used for damage rolls, for spells and weapon attacks. Everything else you do in the game is made with this. I would like to buy that book off you, sir. Okay, roll a D20 persuasion. I rolled a 3, you keep that book, I clearly don't belong here. Sir, that is a beautiful dog, may I pet it? Sure. Go ahead and roll animal handling. That's a 16, your dog is now my best friend. I'm really hungry and I would like to try and get some honey out of that beehive. You think I can do it? I don't know, go ahead and make a nature check. How fast am I? Now for some other TTRPGs, like Dune Adventures in the Imperium, they only use D20s for everything. They even got their own custom D20s you can see right here. Versus Dungeons & Dragons, where you'll roll a D20 to make an attack. If you succeed, you'll then roll a different die of a different number to make that damage. So hopefully that gives you some context as to why the D20 is seen everywhere when it comes to media and merch and just general discussions about Dungeons & Dragons. And if you didn't know what a nat 20 or a nat 1 was, that's why it's talked about with this die, because this is the die you use for virtually everything when it comes to D&D. I hope you learned something today, and even if you knew most of what I talked about, I still hope you found it interesting. Thank you again to Curiosity Box for the Denary dice set. If you want to get a set up yourself, check out their annual subscription using the QR code on screen, or again, that is linked down below. Now, if you want to learn more about dice and you want to know what's better, rolling sharp dice or rounded dice, check out this video here. Or if you're wondering what's better, metal dice or plastic dice, check out this video here.